Long ago, entire civilizations were forged in the fires of impossible wars. We are embarking on a journey through 25 legendary battles, where the line between myth and history completely blurs. You will uncover the hidden truths behind conflicts that decided the fate of gods and the destiny of humanity, from cosmic clashes in the heavens to earth-shattering duels on forgotten islands. What really happened when the Norse gods faced their apocalyptic doom, and could a lost, advanced society have fallen in a single, catastrophic day? What story of a legendary battle has always captivated you the most? Before there were heroes, before cities rose, the very cosmos shuddered from a conflict of unimaginable scale. This was the Titanomachy, a brutal war for the throne of creation itself, a decade-long battle pitting the new Olympian gods against their formidable predecessors, the Titans. On one side stood Cronus, the cunning king who had seized power from his own father, and his mighty allies like the colossal Atlas. Arrayed against them were his children, the Olympians, led by the thunder-wielding Zeus, his sister and queen Hera, and his brother Poseidon, who would one day command the seas. This was not a simple family feud. It was a cosmic revolution, a struggle that would determine the fundamental order of the universe. The ancient poet Hesiod captured its epic contours in his work, the Theogony, describing a world torn apart by divine fury, where mountains were hurled as weapons and the very plains trembled under the combatants' feet. The war's conclusion was as decisive as it was transformative. With the Titans finally overthrown and imprisoned deep within the earth, the rule of the Olympians began, establishing a new divine order that would shape the myths and beliefs of an entire civilization. This foundational victory raises a haunting question. What if such a world-altering war was not merely a story, but a distorted memory of a real prehistoric catastrophe? Yet the victory over the Titans did not bring lasting peace. A new threat was already stirring in the world's darkest corners, born from the very blood of the primordial sky god Uranus. This was the Gigantomachy, a second war for cosmic supremacy, where the newly crowned Olympian gods faced a terrifying rebellion from the giants. These were not mere brutes, but monstrous beings of immense power, some said to be serpent-legged, born from the earth with a single goal: to storm the heavens and overthrow the divine order. The gods themselves fought valiantly, but an ancient prophecy declared they could not win this fight alone. They needed a mortal champion, a hero whose unique nature could turn the tide. That hero was Heracles, the son of Zeus, whose incredible strength and courage made him the perfect ally. The great clash unfolded on the plains of Phlegra, a place often depicted as a scorched and broken landscape. Here, the fate of the cosmos hung in the balance once more. Zeus hurled his thunderbolts, Poseidon shook the earth with his trident, and Athena, the goddess of wisdom and war, battled with strategic brilliance. But it was Heracles, the mortal demigod, who dealt the final, decisive blows to the most fearsome of the giants. His arrows, dipped in the venom of the Lernaean Hydra, proved to be the one weapon the monstrous rebels could not withstand. This epic struggle was far more than just another battle. It represented the ultimate triumph of order over chaos, of the structured cosmos defended by the gods against the raw, untamed forces of the primordial earth. The Gigantomachy secured the Olympian reign for all time, but it leaves us with a profound puzzle. Could this myth, with its theme of established powers battling a monstrous uprising, be a distant echo of a real historical event, perhaps a cataclysmic natural disaster or a foundational human conflict that was later immortalized in divine terms? This divine struggle between order and chaos finds a powerful echo in the cold northern realms. Far from the sun-drenched peaks of Olympus, the Norse gods were locked in their own foundational war, a brutal and confusing conflict known as the Aesir-Vanir War. Here, the pantheon was divided into two distinct tribes. On one side stood the Aesir, gods of power, sovereignty, and war, led by the one-eyed All-Father, Odin. Opposing them were the Vanir, deities of fertility, magic, and the natural world, masters of the earth's bounty and seers of fate. Their war did not begin with a thunderbolt, but with an act of shocking violence. A mysterious goddess, often thought to be Gullveig, whose name means gold thirst, arrived at the hall of the Aesir. She was a being of immense power, associated with Seda magic and perhaps the allure of gold itself. The Aesir, viewing her as a threat or a corrupting influence, did not greet her with hospitality. Instead, they seized her and tried to burn her alive. Yet 3 times they cast her into the flames, and 3 times she was reborn from the ashes, more powerful and more vengeful than before. This failed execution was the spark that ignited the war, a clash not just of gods but of fundamentally different worldviews. The Aesir, with their focus on battle and order, confronted the Vanir, who wielded the deep, untamed magic of the earth. The conflict dragged into a bloody stalemate, with neither side able to claim a clear victory. Exhausted by the endless fighting, both tribes did something remarkable. They chose peace over annihilation. They agreed to a truce sealed by a profound act of exchange. Hostages were sent to live among the former enemies. The Vanir dispatched their finest, the god Njord and his twin children, the radiant Frey and Freyja, to live with the Aesir. In return, the Aesir sent Honir, a god known for his imposing stature, and the wise Mimir. This exchange was meant to create understanding, to blend their strengths into a united pantheon. But the story holds a darker twist. The Vanir soon grew suspicious, feeling that Honir was indecisive without Mimir's counsel to guide him. In a fit of rage, they beheaded Mimir and sent his head back to Odin. The All-Father, using his powerful magic, preserved the head, allowing Mimir to whisper secrets and wisdom to him from the well that now bears his name. So the war ended not with a decisive battle, but with a fragile, hard-won unity. The Vanir gods were integrated into the Aesir's ranks, with Freyja even teaching Odin the secrets of Seda magic. This merger created the pantheon we recognize today, a blend of martial might and fertile magic. It makes you wonder, could this ancient myth of 2 cultures clashing and then merging reflect a real, forgotten history of 2 distinct peoples in Scandinavia, their conflicts and eventual fusion immortalized as a war among the gods themselves? That fragile unity forged in the Aesir-Vanir war carried within it the seeds of its own destruction. The Norse cosmos, having found a precarious balance, was always destined to shatter in a final, catastrophic conflict known as Ragnarök, the twilight of the gods. This was not merely a battle, but a prophesied apocalypse, a necessary end that would cleanse the world and allow for a new beginning. The signs of its coming were unmistakable. First would come Fimbulwinter, a terrible age of 3 consecutive winters with no summer in between, a time of bitter cold and endless darkness that would shatter all bonds of kinship and morality among humanity. As the world freezes, the bonds holding the trickster god Loki and his monstrous children will finally break. Loki, the architect of so much chaos, will break free from his agonizing captivity, and his son, the monstrous wolf Fenrir, will slip his magical fetter. From the east, a great army of frost giants will march, and from the south, the fire giants led by the blazing Surtur will advance, their path lit by the burning of all the worlds. The watchman god Heimdall, seeing this doom approach, will raise the Gjala horn, a horn whose mournful cry will echo through the 9 realms, a call to arms that no god can ignore. The gods, the Einherjar warriors from Valhalla, and all the forces of order will muster for one final stand on the plain of Vigrid. They will be met by a horrifying fleet, the ship Naglfar, built from the untrimmed fingernails and toenails of the dead, steered by Loki himself and carrying the hordes of hell. This is where all fate converges in a series of fated, tragic duels. The All-Father Odin, in his golden helmet, will ride forth to face his destined killer, the wolf Fenrir. Despite his immense wisdom and power, the prophecy holds true, and the great wolf will swallow Odin whole. Thor, the champion of mankind, will face his ancient nemesis, the world serpent Jörmungandr. With his mighty hammer Mjolnir, he will strike the colossal beast dead, but will only manage to take 9 steps before succumbing to the serpent's venom. The god Freyr, having given away his magical sword for love, will fall to the fire giant Surtur. One by one, the gods and their allies will fall. Surtur will then fling fire across the earth, and the stars will vanish from the sky as the world tree Yggdrasil itself trembles. Yet this total annihilation is not the end. From the ashes and the submerged, purified world, a new green earth will emerge from the sea. A new sun, the daughter of the old one, will warm the land. A handful of gods will survive, including Odin's sons Vidar and Vali and Thor's children. 2 humans sheltered deep within the world tree will repopulate the earth. They will find the golden game pieces the Aesir once played with, symbols of a lost golden age. So the cycle completes itself, not with a permanent victory, but with a necessary death and a hopeful rebirth. This profound myth of cyclical destruction makes you question if it is a metaphor for the inevitable end of all things, or perhaps a distant ancestral memory of a real, world-altering cataclysm, like a volcanic winter or a great flood that promised renewal on the other side of utter despair. From the ashes of a world reborn, we journey now to a different kind of battlefield, one where the fate of a kingdom rested on a single, earth-shattering conflict. In the vast tapestry of Indian legend, no story looms larger than the Mahabharata, and at its heart lies the 18-day war of Kurukshetra. This was not a clash of gods and monsters, but a devastating family feud, a civil war between 2 branches of the same royal house, the Pandavas and the Kauravas. The field of Kurukshetra was the stage for this immense drama, a place where duty, honor, and morality were tested to their absolute limits. The air was thick with the tension of 100,000 conch shells sounding the call to battle, a sound that promised not glory but almost certain sorrow. On one side stood the 5 Pandava brothers, righteous and wronged, their kingdom stolen through a rigged game of dice. Arrayed against them were their 100 cousins, the Kauravas, led by the ambitious and envious Duryodhana, who refused to yield even a speck of their rightful land. But the most pivotal figure on that field was not a king or a warrior king. It was the Prince Arjuna, the Pandavas' greatest archer, standing in his chariot. And his charioteer was the god Krishna himself, the divine lord in human form. As the 2 armies prepared to charge, Arjuna was seized by a profound crisis of conscience. He looked across at his teachers, his cousins, his elders, all gathered to kill and be killed, and his bow, the mighty Gandiva, grew heavy in his hands. He saw no victory in a war that would destroy his own family. In this moment of absolute despair, he turned to Krishna and refused to fight. What followed was one of the most sacred and influential dialogues in all of literature, the Bhagavad Gita. Krishna did not simply command Arjuna to fight. Instead, he delivered a profound discourse on the nature of duty, the soul, and righteous action. He spoke of dharma, one's sacred duty, and the importance of fulfilling it without attachment to the fruits of one's labor. He revealed his own cosmic, universal form, a breathtaking vision of infinite gods and burning worlds, to show Arjuna the grand, timeless scale of existence beyond the immediate horror of the battlefield. This spiritual revelation steeled Arjuna's resolve, and the war began. The conflict that unfolded was unlike any other, fought with celestial weapons of terrifying power. Arjuna wielded divine astras, arrows invoked with the power of gods, capable of summoning storms or turning into countless serpents. His brothers commanded their own unique weapons, while the Kaurava side fielded legendary warriors like the grandsire Bhishma, who was virtually invincible, and the master teacher Drona. Yet for all the divine power on display, the war was won as much by cunning and broken rules as by valor. As the days wore on, the Pandavas, pushed to the brink, resorted to morally ambiguous tactics to eliminate key opponents, breaking the very codes of war they had sworn to uphold. Bhishma was felled not in a fair fight, but by using a warrior who was born a woman as a shield. The great Drona was killed only after a deliberate lie shattered his will to live. Each victory was stained with ethical compromise, blurring the lines between right and wrong. By the war's end, nearly the entire warrior caste lay dead on the field of Kurukshetra. The Pandavas had won, but their victory was utterly hollow. They ruled over a kingdom of ashes and widows, their own family all but extinct. The epic closes not with celebration, but with a deep, lingering sorrow and a meditation on the true cost of conflict. It forces us to ask, could such a detailed and devastating account of a war, with its complex moral philosophy and its focus on a cataclysmic battle, be a legendary echo of a real historical conflict that reshaped ancient India? That profound sorrow felt on the field of Kurukshetra finds its counterpoint in a war waged not for a kingdom, but for love and honor. The Ramayana presents a different kind of legendary battle, one where the lines between good and evil are drawn with starker clarity. This is the Great War of Lanka, where Prince Rama, the divine avatar of the god Vishnu, leads a fantastical army to rescue his abducted wife, Sita, from the clutches of the 10-headed demon king, Ravana. The conflict is set on the island fortress of Lanka, a city of immense wealth and formidable defenses, protected by towering walls and vast armies of Rakshasa demons. To challenge this power, Rama and his brother Lakshmana assemble a force unlike any other, the army of the Vanaras. These are not ordinary monkeys, but powerful, intelligent beings with human-like qualities, led by the noble King Sugriva and his most devoted commander, the mighty Hanuman. Hanuman himself is a figure of immense power, a devotee whose loyalty to Rama is absolute. His leap across the ocean to Lanka is the stuff of legend, a single bound that symbolizes the boundless power of faith. Once there, he not only locates Sita, but also sets the golden city ablaze with his burning tail, a daring act of psychological warfare that signals the coming storm. The war that follows is a spectacle of magical and aerial combat. The battlefield is a chaos of illusion and reality. Demonic warriors use their dark magic to disappear, change shape, or unleash weapons of mystical fire and poison. The Vanaras, in turn, fight with the raw power of nature, uprooting trees and hurling mountains as projectiles. The skies are filled with flying chariots and warriors leaping through the air, their duels painting the heavens with streaks of energy and force. At the heart of this cosmic struggle is the final epic duel between Rama and Ravana. Ravana is no mere monster, he is a brilliant scholar, a mighty king, and a devout devotee of the god Shiva. His 10 heads represent his vast knowledge and his mastery over the many directions of the cosmos, yet they also symbolize his tenfold ego and his ultimate flaw, an unchecked desire that led him to commit the grave sin of taking another's wife. Their confrontation is the climax of the epic. Ravana, in his magnificent chariot, unleashes a torrent of divine weapons, each one capable of destroying entire armies. Rama, standing firm on the ground, meets each astra with a counter-weapon of his own. The battle rages for days, a test of skill, endurance, and divine will. The turning point comes when Rama finally wields the ultimate weapon, the Brahmastra, a celestial arrow charged with the power of the universe itself. He launches it, and the missile, guided by righteousness, finds its mark, striking Ravana in the heart and ending his reign forever. The victory is immediate and total. It is celebrated not just as a personal triumph for Rama, but as the ultimate victory of Dharma over Adharma, of cosmic order over the chaos of selfish desire. Sita is rescued, and Rama's righteous rule, the Ram Rajya, begins. Yet, this clear-cut victory carries its own subtle complexities, making us wonder if this archetypal tale of a heroic rescue and a demon's defeat is a mythologized account of ancient cultural expansions, where advanced northern kingdoms brought their ideals of order to the southern lands, their conflicts immortalized as a war between a god prince and a demon king. Across the sea, another ancient culture forged its identity in a war of cosmic significance. In the mists of Chinese mythology, the very foundations of civilization were laid on the battlefield between two legendary figures, Huangdi, the Yellow Emperor, and the monstrous warlord Kaiyu. This was a conflict for the soul of the land itself. Kaiyu was a being of terrifying power, a rebel god with a bronze head and iron forehead who fed on stones and sand. He commanded an army of demons and feathered tribes, harnessing the very elements of wind and rain against his foes. The Yellow Emperor, revered as the ancestor of all Han Chinese, stood as the pillar of order and wisdom against this tide of chaos. Their war was not merely a physical struggle, but a contest of magical ingenuity. At a critical moment, Kaiyu enveloped the battlefield in an impenetrable fog, a mystical miasma that disoriented the Yellow Emperor's forces and threatened to hand victory to the forces of darkness. Faced with this magical siege, the Emperor displayed his legendary brilliance. He is said to have invented a south-pointing chariot, a miraculous device with a figure that always pointed south, regardless of which way the chariot turned. This early conceptual compass cut through the magical fog, allowing his armies to navigate and counterattack. The conflict culminated in an epic final confrontation. The Yellow Emperor, having rallied his allies and perfected his strategy, summoned all his divine power. He called upon the celestial dragon, Yinglong, to dam the rivers and withhold the rains that Kaiyu commanded. The battle was fierce and earth-shattering, but ultimately the Yellow Emperor prevailed, striking down the fearsome Kaiyu and securing his reign. This victory was far more than a military conquest. It represented the triumph of human innovation over primal chaos, of ordered civilization over untamed brutality. The reign of the Yellow Emperor that followed is credited with the invention of writing, silk, medicine, and the fundamental structures of Chinese society. It makes you wonder if this mythic war, with its themes of ingenuity and unification, is the glorious memory of a real, prehistoric unification of tribal peoples along the Yellow River, their conflicts and technological advances immortalized as a divine struggle between a sage emperor and a demonic warlord. That same thread of a kingdom won at a terrible cost echoes in the misty hills of Britain. While Arthur Pendragon secured his throne and forged a realm of justice through many battles, it was his final conflict that sealed his legend forever. The Battle of Camlan stands as a devastating end to the Age of Camelot, a tragic clash not against a foreign invader, but from a betrayal within the heart of the court itself. The cause of this catastrophic civil war is shrouded in conflicting tales, but they all spiral from a single, poisonous source, the treachery of Mordred. In some versions, Mordred is Arthur's own nephew, a knight of the Round Table. In others, a more horrifying twist reveals him as Arthur's illegitimate son, born from an unknowing union with his half-sister. While Arthur was away campaigning on the continent, he left his kingdom in Mordred's care. Seizing the opportunity, Mordred declared the king dead and moved to seize the throne for himself, even taking Arthur's own queen, Guinevere, by force or by agreement depending on the telling. The news pulled Arthur back to Britain for one last fateful campaign. The exact location of Camlan remains one of history's great mysteries. Chroniclers have placed it everywhere from the rocky slopes of Cornwall to the river valleys of Wales, but no physical evidence has ever definitively pinpointed the field. This geographical obscurity only deepens the myth, transforming Camlan from a simple location into the very idea of a destined tragic end. When the two armies finally met, the flower of Arthurian chivalry was gathered on that field. This was not a battle against Saxon invaders, but a brutal fratricide where knight fought against knight, and former comrades cut each other down. The Fellowship of the Round Table, the greatest brotherhood of warriors the land had ever known, was systematically slaughtered. The most poignant accounts describe the final, personal confrontation between the king and his betrayer. In a furious exchange, Arthur struck down Mordred, running him through with his legendary spear, Rhongomyniad. But with his dying breath, Mordred delivered a mortal blow to his king, a terrible wound that would not heal. The battlefield fell silent, littered with the dead, the dream of Camelot extinguished in a single afternoon. With his last strength, Arthur commanded his sole surviving knight, Bedivere, to return the sword Excalibur to the Lady of the Lake. The story of Bedivere's reluctance, throwing the magnificent blade into the water only after 2 failed attempts, highlights the profound difficulty of letting the old magic die. As the mystical hand rose from the depths to catch the sword, it signaled the end of an era. Arthur himself was then borne away on a barge by mysterious, sorrowful queens, traveling across the water to the mystical Isle of Avalon, a place of healing outside of time. His stated purpose was to have his wounds tended, with the promise that he would return in his nation's darkest hour. This final journey did not proclaim a definite death, but instead created the powerful, enduring myth of the once and future king, a ruler sleeping until he is needed again. This legend makes us question whether Camlan represents the fall of a real post-Roman British war leader, his story so amplified by hope that his death could never be fully accepted. The legend of a sleeping king awaiting his call to return carries a particular magic, but for the Irish Tuatha Dé Danann, their destiny was forged not in quiet slumber, but in 2 earth-shattering conflicts for the soul of their new home. Their story begins with a dramatic arrival, descending from the skies in a magical mist to settle in Ireland, a land already claimed by a people known as the Fir Bolg. This first great battle, the Cath Maige Tuaird, was a fight for territory, a clash between 2 powerful mortal races. The Tuatha Dé Danann, masters of magic and craft, demanded half the island. The Fir Bolg, proud and established, refused. The battle that followed was one of horrific carnage and noble conduct. At its heart was the king of the Tuatha Dé Danann, Nuada. In the ferocious fighting, he lost his hand, and according to the strict laws of kingship, a ruler with a physical blemish could not reign. Despite leading his people to a hard-won victory, the honorable Nuada was forced to abdicate his throne. This first battle established the Tuatha Dé Danann in Ireland, but it created a power vacuum that invited a far greater threat. From across the sea came the Fomorians, a monstrous, chaotic race of pirate giants, often depicted with distorted bodies, some with 1 arm and 1 leg. They were a tyranny of the sea, demanding crippling tribute from the new settlers. The second battle, also named Cath Maige Tuaird, was the true defining moment for the gods of Ireland. It was no simple war for land, but a cosmic struggle between order and primeval chaos. The Tuatha Dé Danann, now ruled by the tyrannical Fomorian king Brez, suffered under his oppressive rule. Their salvation came in the form of a young, radiant figure, Lug Lamfodda. He arrived at the royal court, and when the gatekeeper asked what skill he possessed, Lug declared he was a master of all arts. He was a warrior, a poet, a historian, a craftsman, and a sorcerer, a figure of such complete talent that King Nuada, who had been restored to the throne with a magically crafted silver hand, willingly gave him command of the entire army for 13 days. Lug's leadership transformed the coming conflict. He prepared for war not just with soldiers but with powerful talismans, the 4 treasures of the Tuatha Dé Danann. There was the invincible spear of Lug, which never missed its target, the sword of Nuada from which no one could escape, the cauldron of the Dagda that could feed an entire army, and the stone of destiny, the Lia Fail, which would cry out beneath the feet of the true king. On the day of the great battle, the very landscape seemed to take sides. The Dagda, the great father god, used his mighty club to leave trenches in the earth. The Morrigan, the powerful goddess of war and fate, stirred terror in the hearts of the Fomorians with her prophecies and chants. The fighting was brutal and personal. Lug confronted the mighty Fomorian champion, Balor of the Evil Eye, a giant whose single eye, when opened, unleashed a destructive power that could decimate whole ranks of warriors. But Lug, with his sling, shot a stone with such force that it drove Balor's own poisonous eye straight through his head. so that its deadly gaze fell upon the Fomorian army itself. The Tuatha Dé Danann were victorious, driving the forces of chaos back into the sea. Yet the victory was bittersweet. Their good and just king, Nuada, was slain, and Lugh, the brilliant hero, became the new ruler. This epic war secured the Tuatha Dé Danann's rule over Ireland for generations, establishing the age of the gods that would precede the coming of mortal men. It makes you wonder if these two battles, one for land and a second for cosmic order, are a mythic memory of ancient invasions and conflicts between different waves of settlers, their leaders and heroes elevated to divine status, their struggles echoing the universal human fight to carve order from a world of chaos. The tragedy of a kingdom devoured from within finds its perfect echo in the curse-ridden city of Thebes. Here, the sins of the father, Oedipus, were visited upon his sons with terrifying precision. The brothers Eteocles and Polynices, destined to share the throne of Thebes in alternating years, saw their agreement shatter into bitter rivalry. Eteocles, having taken his turn as king, refused to relinquish power, forcing Polynices into exile. Burning with righteous fury, Polynices journeyed to the city of Argos, where he won the support of King Adrastus and 5 other mighty champions. Together, they formed the Army of the Seven, marching on Thebes to reclaim what Polynices believed was his by right. The stage was set for a war that would be remembered not for glory, but for its relentless, predetermined doom. The 7 gates of Thebes became the focal points of the coming storm, each assigned to one of the city's greatest defenders and besieged by one of the Argive champions. This was not a single battle, but 7 simultaneous, desperate duels. The fates of the attackers unfolded like a grim tapestry of divine punishment and heroic failure. At the Homoloidian Gate, the seer Amphiaraus, who had foreseen his own death, was swallowed by the earth as he fled, a chasm opening to claim him as a sign of the god's displeasure. The fierce Capaneus, boasting he would take the city even against the will of Zeus himself, was struck down by a divine thunderbolt while scaling the walls. Tydeus, a warrior of immense ferocity, was mortally wounded but granted a chance at immortality by the goddess Athena. She brought a potion to restore him, only to recoil in horror as he savagely devoured the brain of his fallen enemy. The goddess withdrew her gift and he died in agony. One by one, the champions met their gruesome ends, their assaults repelled at the gates. The heart of the tragedy, however, lay at the 7th gate. Here, the curse of Oedipus reached its awful conclusion. The 2 brothers, Eteocles and Polynices, faced each other in a final, personal combat. They fought not as king and challenger, but as mirror images of their own shared doom. In a brutal exchange, each dealt the other a mortal blow, fulfilling their father's prophecy that they would divide their inheritance with steel. The 2 sons of Oedipus lay dead by each other's hand, the ultimate expression of a family and a city tearing itself apart. With the attackers defeated and their leaders dead, the war seemed over. But the tragedy was not yet complete. The new ruler of Thebes, Creon, decreed that as punishment for his treachery, the body of Polynices was to be left unburied beyond the city walls, a fate considered horrific in the ancient world as it condemned the soul to eternal unrest. This act of political vengeance against a dead man would ignite a second fire of conflict, one led by the next generation. The sons of the 7 fallen champions, the Epigoni, would return years later to finish what their fathers started, besieging and finally conquering Thebes. The War of the 7 was not an end, but a vicious cycle, proving that no victory born of a family curse can ever truly bring peace. It forces us to ask if this epic of fraternal strife is a cautionary tale about the dangers of power and the inescapable weight of ancestral sin, a story so human in its failures that it feels less like myth and more like a warning from a forgotten age. Long before the Tuatha Dé Danann arrived in their magical mist, Ireland was a stage for an even more primordial tragedy. The first to carve a civilization from the wild landscape were the people of Partholon, who landed on its shores generations after the Great Flood had receded. They were not gods, but mighty mortals, pioneers tasked with building a society from nothing. Under Partholan's leadership, they cleared plains, established laws, and fostered the arts of brewing and hospitality, creating a vibrant world in a land previously inhabited only by dark, formless creatures. For 300 years, their civilization flourished, a testament to human resilience in a new world. Yet their prosperity drew the attention of a predatory force from the sea. The Fomorians in this earlier age were not just a rival tribe but a pervasive, elemental blight. They were pirates and raiders of monstrous aspect, some depicted with single arms and single legs, who descended upon the Partholans to demand cruel tribute and sow terror. This was not a war for a throne, but a desperate struggle for survival against a parasitic enemy. The conflict culminated in a single, massive battle at a place called Mog-Ith. The Partholans, fighting for their very existence, managed to drive the Fomorians back into the ocean, securing a hard-won peace. But their victory was shockingly short-lived. A silent, invisible enemy had already slipped past their defenses. A plague, swift and merciless, fell upon the Partholonians. It began with a choking cough and spread with terrifying speed, claiming thousands of lives in a single week. In the end, not a single soul of the Partholan people was left alive. Their entire civilization, every chieftain, every farmer, every child, was utterly erased from the island they had worked so hard to build. The land fell silent once more, empty and waiting, until the next wave of settlers, the Nemedians, would arrive to repeat the cycle of struggle against the ever-present Fomorians. This near-total annihilation presents a haunting mystery. Was this legend a way to explain the ruins of a forgotten prehistoric people, their end so complete that it could only be understood as a divine curse or a cleansing plague, leaving behind only the echo of a civilization that was and then suddenly was not? Death can be a battlefield too, even for the gods who created the world. In the sacred texts of Japan, the Kojiki, the very islands themselves, were born from the union of two primordial deities, Izanagi and Izanami. Theirs was a story of creation, of stirring the ocean brine with a jeweled spear to form the land. But creation turned to tragedy when Izanami, while giving birth to the fire god Kagetsuchi, was burned so severely that she descended to Yomi, the foul and polluted land of the dead. Her husband, the mighty Izanagi, was shattered by grief. He could not accept this separation and made a fateful decision. He would journey into the underworld himself and bring his beloved back to the land of the living. His descent into Yomi was a journey into absolute darkness, a place where decay hung heavy in the stagnant air. He finally found Izanami within the gloom, her form hidden in shadows. She spoke to him, her voice a hollow echo, but she warned him not to look upon her. She said she had already eaten the food of this land and could not simply leave, but she would speak with the gods of Yomi to plead for her release. She made him promise with absolute certainty that he would not try to see her in this state. But as she retreated into the deeper darkness to confer, a terrible, gnawing suspicion grew in Izanagi. The weight became unbearable. What if she was changed? What if this was a trick? Driven by a love that had curdled into fear and impatience, he broke his solemn vow. He snapped a tooth from the wooden comb in his hair, lit it as a single torch, and pushed forward to find her. The flickering light fell upon Izanami, and the sight was one of pure cosmic horror. The beautiful goddess of creation was gone. In her place was a swollen, rotting corpse crawling with maggots, with thunder gods rumbling in her putrefying flesh. He had seen the true, hideous face of death. A scream tore from his throat, and he turned and ran. The shock of being seen in her decay transformed Izanami's sorrow into a bottomless, vengeful rage. She shrieked, calling him a betrayer who had shamed her, and she gave chase. She sent the 8 thunder deities born from her body and a host of hideous hags, the Yomatsu Shikome, to hunt him down. Izanagi's flight from Yomi became a desperate race for existence itself. He flung his headdress behind him, which turned into a bunch of grapes to distract the hags. He threw his comb and it became a thicket of bamboo shoots, slowing his pursuers. But Izanami herself continued the chase, her fury propelling her forward. Reaching the boundary between the land of the dead and the living, the even pass of Yomi, Izanagi heaved a massive boulder to block the entrance, sealing his wife and all the pollution of death forever on the other side. From behind this great divide, Izanami screamed a final, terrible curse. She vowed that she would strangle 1,000 of the people of his country every day. To this, Izanagi, now the ruler of life, declared that he would cause 1,500 people to be born every day. This eternal struggle between creation and destruction was now set into the very rhythm of the world. But the ordeal was not over. Izanagi, now polluted by his contact with death, had to undergo a ritual of purification. As he washed himself in a river, each piece of clothing and impurity he shed fell to the earth and became a new deity. Most profoundly, when he washed his left eye, the sun goddess Amaterasu was born. From his right eye came the moon god Tsukuyomi, and from his nose the storm god Susanoo. This was not a battle of swords and spears, but a confrontation with the ultimate taboo, a flight from a love that had become monstrous. It makes you wonder if this foundational myth reflects a deep, primal understanding of the cycle of life and death, and the dangerous, polluting power of the deceased, a concept that would shape an entire culture's rituals and worldview for centuries to come. The bitter taste of a family torn apart by war is a sorrow that echoes across cultures and centuries. From the cursed gates of Thebes, we travel now to the misty frontiers of the ancient Germanic world, where a single, devastating confrontation between two warriors encapsulates the very soul of epic tragedy. This is the Hildebrandslied, the Song of Hildebrand, one of the oldest surviving pieces of Germanic heroic poetry. Its power lies not in a cast of thousands, but in the intimate, agonizing drama of two men on a dusty road. Hildebrand was a champion, a loyal armsman who followed his lord, Theodoric the Great, into a long exile, fighting for decades in foreign lands while his homeland faded into a half-remembered dream. Now an old man, his hair streaked with gray, he finally rides home, but the world he left behind has moved on without him. He is a stranger in his own land, a ghost from a forgotten war. His return is met not with celebration, but with the cold, hard point of a spear. A young, proud warrior named Hadebrand blocks his path, accusing the older man of being a Hunnish spy, a deceitful trickster from the east. The tragedy deepens with every line of their tense dialogue. Hildebrand, his heart surely breaking, tries to reason with the youth. He speaks of the old days, of the lords they both served, and he offers gifts of fine gold twisted from an ancient hoard, a desperate attempt at peace. He even suggests that the young man's own father was the great Hildebrand, a hero he once knew, but Hadebrand will have none of it. He is a product of a new, more cynical age. He declares that his father is long dead, lost to the sea or the spear, and he angrily rejects the old man's words as the lies of a coward. He sees only an enemy standing before him, a relic to be swept aside to prove his own valor. Honor, that iron code of the warrior, now becomes an inescapable prison. For Hildebrand, there is no retreat. To refuse the challenge would be to brand himself a coward, to shatter the reputation he built over a lifetime of combat. For Hadebrand, victory over this seasoned veteran is the key to his own glory and standing. The old man sees the terrible truth dawning, the horrific shape of his fate. He understands that the young, fierce warrior he must now fight, the one who hates him as a stranger, is his own son. The manuscript, ancient and fragile, records Hildebrand's agonized lament. He speaks of the devil's work, that he must now fight his own child or meet his own death. He has no choice. The two warriors circle each other, and then they cast their spears. The shields are shattered, and they close in with their swords, hacking at the sturdy linden wood of their defenses. And then the heartbreak. The single surviving manuscript breaks off right there, mid-sentence, as the two swords ring together. We are left forever on that battlefield, never knowing if a father was forced to kill his son, or if a son, in his moment of victory, would discover he had slain his own father. This abrupt silence is in its own way more powerful than any ending. It leaves the tragedy suspended in time, a permanent question mark over the human cost of conflict. It forces us to confront a chilling possibility that the greatest casualties of war are not always counted among the dead, but are sometimes measured in the bonds that are irrevocably broken before they can even be forged. That intimate tragedy of a father and son on a lonely road mirrors a conflict written across the heavens themselves. In the vast belief system of the ancient Slavs, the entire cosmos was defined by a perpetual, cyclical struggle between two powerful gods. On one side stood Perun, the formidable lord of thunder, lightning, and the clear sky. He was the enforcer of law and order, a divine warrior who wielded a mighty axe or a club that men saw in every lightning strike. His voice was the thunder that rumbled over the plains, and his anger was the storm that cleansed the land. Opposing him was Veles, a being of a completely different nature. Veles was the god of the underworld, of deep waters, magic, and the fertile earth. He was the protector of cattle, wealth, and the hidden knowledge that lies beneath the surface of things. Where Perun ruled the vertical, ordered world of the sky and the tall oak tree, Veles governed the horizontal, chaotic world of the forests, rivers, and the subterranean realms. Their eternal conflict was the engine of the mythic cycle. The tension would begin when Veles, in his role as the trickster and challenger, would commit a profound theft. He would slither up from his watery domain or emerge from the roots of the world tree to steal something precious from Perun. Often, this was Perun's divine cattle, the clouds themselves, or sometimes even members of his family. This was not a simple crime, it was an act of cosmic imbalance. By stealing from the god of the sky, Veles was dragging order down into the realm of chaos. The response was immediate and spectacular. The mighty Perun would mount his chariot and pursue Veles across the earth. His chase was the raging storm front, his fury manifesting in the lightning bolts he hurled at the fleeing god. These bolts did not just flash and vanish, they were believed to embed themselves in the earth, their power seeping into the soil to become sacred stones that farmers would later find and keep for protection. Veles, in his flight, would transform into various animals to escape, most commonly a serpent or a dragon, weaving through rivers and hiding in the hollows of great trees. But Perun's aim was true. He would inevitably strike Veles, defeating him and forcing him to return what was stolen. This victory was not a permanent end, however. It was a temporary restoration. Veles would retreat, wounded, back to his underworld domain, and the stolen cattle or waters would be released, bringing life-giving rain to the earth. The world would return to a state of balance and order, but only until the cycle began anew. This eternal duel was far more than a simple feud. It represented the fundamental Slavic understanding of the world's rhythm. The struggle between the sky god and the earth god symbolized the clash between the structured, predictable forces of law and the wild, unpredictable forces of chaos. It was the conflict between the dry upper world and the wet lower world, between the blazing sun and the life-giving rain. Their battle was essential, for it was through this very conflict that the world was continually cleansed, refreshed, and remade. The rain that nourished the crops came from the storm of their fight. This makes you wonder if this powerful, repeating myth was the ancient Slavs' way of explaining the very weather patterns that dictated their survival, personifying the terrifying yet necessary thunderstorms of summer as a divine drama that ensured the world kept turning. Deep within the humid darkness of the Mayan underworld, a game of life and death was already in progress. The sacred text known as the Popol Vuh tells us this was not the first time the arrogant lords of Xibalba had challenged mortals to their deadly contest. Long before the hero twins were born, their father and uncle, the first set of twins, had been lured into the depths by the same haunting invitation to play the ball game. They failed. The Lords of Death tricked them, sacrificed them, and placed the head of one brother, Hun-Hunapoo, in a calabash tree as a grisly trophy. From this very act of death, however, new life was conceived, leading to the birth of the legendary brothers Hunapoo and Expalank. The twins were destined for greatness from the start, demonstrating their cleverness by outwitting their own jealous half-brothers and mastering the arts of the hunt. But their true calling was a descent into the very heart of darkness to avenge their father and confront the source of all mortal suffering. Their journey to Xibalba was a gauntlet of psychological and physical traps, each designed to break their will and claim their lives. The first test was the Dark House, a chamber of utter blackness where even a torch could not pierce the gloom. The twins did not fight the darkness, they outsmarted it. They placed a single, vibrant red feather on the tail of a macaw, and the bird's movement in the pitch black became their guide, allowing them to survive the night. Next came the Razor House, a room filled with shifting, deadly blades. Instead of trying to dodge them, Hunapoo and Expalank spoke to the very stones of the blades, promising them the soft flesh of animals if they would hold still. The blades, enchanted by this offer, became passive, and the twins walked through unharmed. They endured the Cold House, the Jaguar House, and the Fire House, not with brute force, but with ingenious solutions and a deep understanding of the natural and supernatural worlds. Each victory was a humiliation for the death gods, who grew increasingly furious at their inability to kill these seemingly mortal boys. The final and greatest confrontation was, fittingly, the ballgame itself. The Lords of Xibalba believed their victory was assured on their own court, but the twins had a master plan. During the game, they allowed themselves to be defeated and sacrificed. The Lords of Death, triumphant, ground their bones and cast them into a river, but this was all part of the twins' grand design. 5 days later, they were reborn from the waters as miraculous fishmen, and they returned to the world not as themselves, but as mysterious, powerful vagabonds and dancers. They performed impossible feats, dancing with animals, setting houses on fire and restoring them, and even sacrificing each other only to return to life. The Lords of Death were utterly captivated. They demanded to see the ultimate trick, to witness a sacrifice performed on one of their own. Seizing the moment, the twins seized the two most powerful lords, the prime movers of death itself, and sacrificed them. But this time there was no resurrection. The twins revealed their true identities, having defeated the gods of death not by matching their power but by surpassing their cunning. They did not destroy the underworld, but they broke its absolute power over humanity, paving the way for the final creation of true human beings from sacred maze. This epic struggle makes you wonder, could this myth of clever heroes outwitting death in a ballgame be a symbolic retelling of the eternal cycle of the seasons, where life must descend into the earth and overcome darkness to be reborn with the rising sun? A forest can be a weapon in the hands of a master. In the misty realms of Celtic Welsh mythology, we find a conflict unlike any other, a war fought not with iron and bronze, but with root and branch. This is the Cad Godu, the Battle of the Trees, a cryptic poem preserved in the ancient Book of Taliesin. The text presents a surreal and bewildering scene where the great magician and bard Gwydion, facing a powerful foe, performs an act of supreme enchantment. He sings, he chants, he weaves a spell so potent that the entire forest awakens. Every oak, every hazel, every thorny bush and delicate fern rises from the soil, uprooting itself to march as his living, breathing army. The poem describes the landscape itself going to war, with alder trees leading the charge and willows bringing up the rear, a botanical legion moving to the rhythm of Gwydion's powerful verses. But who was the enemy, and what was this battle truly about? The poem is deliberately obscure, a labyrinth of riddles that has fascinated scholars for centuries. One compelling theory suggests the Cad Godu was a mythological retelling of a real, though lost, historical conflict between rival Welsh kingdoms, where the names of leaders and tribes were encoded in the names of trees for poetic safety. Another interpretation sees it not as a physical war, but as a brilliant allegory for the fierce intellectual battles between bards. In this view, the trees represent the complex, structured knowledge of the bardic tradition, with each species symbolizing a different branch of learning or a specific type of poetic meter. The battle, then, becomes a contest of wits and wisdom, a duel of esoteric knowledge where the most skilled bard, like Gwydion, could metaphorically mobilize the entire forest of his learning to overwhelm his opponent. Yet a third, more mystical reading views the struggle as a cosmic event, a clash between the forces of light and darkness, order and chaos, where the animated forest represents the raw, untamed power of nature being harnessed for a divine purpose. The true meaning of the Khadgadhu remains one of mythology's great enigmas, a puzzle where history, poetry, and magic are so deeply intertwined that they have become one and the same. This strange and beautiful battle makes you wonder if the ancient Celts saw the world as a living text, where every tree held a story and every war could be won with a perfectly crafted song. Even the mightiest hero can be trapped by fate. In the grand tapestry of the Persian epic, the Shahnameh, we find a conflict where honor and destiny collide in a heartbreaking duel. This is the story of Rostam, Iran's champion for 7 lifetimes, a warrior of unmatched strength and virtue, and Prince Esfandiar, a royal heir blessed or cursed with invincibility. A divine prophecy had sealed the prince's fate, declaring that he would meet his end only if he ever marched to seize the throne. His own father, the jealous King Goshtasp, saw this prophecy not as a warning to protect his son but as a perfect tool. He commanded Esfandiar to journey to the distant province of Zabulistan to arrest the legendary Rostam and bring him back to the royal court in chains. For the king, this was a perfect, cruel scheme. If Rostam resisted and killed the prince, the king would be rid of a rival. If the prince succeeded, the king's own power would be unchallenged. Esfandiar, bound by his duty to his father and his king, was caught in an impossible bind, marching toward a doom he could see but felt honor bound not to avoid. When the two heroes finally met, there was no instant hatred, only a deep and mutual respect. Rostam, an elder statesman of valor, looked upon the noble prince and saw a tragic figure. He pleaded with Esfandiar, offering tribute and loyalty, trying desperately to avoid a fight that pitted 2 righteous men against one another. He knew that to raise his sword against the prince was to become a pawn in the king's vicious game. But Esfandiar, his honor shackled to his father's command, refused to yield. He could not return to the court without completing his mission, even if that mission was his own death sentence. The ensuing battle was a spectacle of futility. Rostam, a giant among warriors, unleashed his full arsenal. He fired arrows that could pierce stone, and he swung his famous club with earth-shattering force. Yet every strike simply glanced off Esfandiar's divinely protected skin. The prince was truly invulnerable, a living fortress. Wounded and exhausted, the great Rostam was forced to retreat. In his moment of deepest despair, he turned to the one source of wisdom that had always guided his family, the magical Simurgh bird. This magnificent phoenix-like creature, a being of immense age and knowledge, had watched over Rostam since his birth. Hearing his call, the Simurgh descended, its feathers gleaming with the light of 1,000 stars. It listened to the hero's plight and revealed the one tragic secret to defeating the invincible prince. The only weapon that could harm Esfandiar was not forged of metal but grown from a tree. Rostam needed a branch from the tamarisk, a specific tree blessed with a unique and paradoxical nature. Guided by the Simurgh, he found the tree and fashioned a double-headed arrow from one of its branches. He hardened the point in a fire, tempering wood into a deadly point. The next day, the 2 champions faced each other once more. Rostam, his heart heavy with the knowledge of what he must do, took aim with the wooden arrow. He prayed for a clean shot, and his aim was true. The tamarisk arrow, defying all divine protection, flew straight and found the one vulnerable spot in Esfandiar's body, his eye. As the prince lay dying, there was no triumph in Rostam's heart, only a profound sorrow. The two warriors spoke, and Esfandiar, in his final moments, acknowledged the cruel hand of fate that had forced them into this duel. He forgave his killer, understanding that Rostam was as much a victim of the king's manipulation as he was. This was not a victory of good over evil, but a devastating tragedy where two forms of honor were pitted against each other, ensuring that no one truly won. It leaves us to ponder the heavy price of duty and the chilling ways in which power can corrupt even the most sacred of bonds. A different kind of treasure lay at the heart of Finland's great epic, a prize that was not a weapon but a source of life itself. In the Kalevala, the aging bard and sage Väinämöinen yearned for prosperity for his people, a dream that centered on a single, miraculous object, the Sampo. This was no mere trinket, it was a magical mill forged of unknown metals by the divine smith Ilmarinen. Its lid spun like a great constellation, and from its depths it ground out endless salt, grain, and gold, creating boundless wealth and stability for its owners. The problem was, the Sampo did not belong to the people of Kalevala. It was held in the dark northern land of Pohjola, a shadowy realm ruled by the cunning and powerful witch Lauhai, who jealously guarded the artifact's power for herself alone. Väinämöinen knew that to secure his people's future, he would have to embark on a perilous quest to steal it. He recruited the very smith who created the Sampo, Ilmarinen, and the reckless, passionate warrior Lemminkainen. Together, this unlikely trio set sail in a great ship, their journey northward a voyage into the heart of myth and danger. Their plan was one of pure audacity, to sail directly to Pohjola and take the Sampo by force or by trickery from the formidable Lauhai. The epic sea battle that followed was a chaos of magic and steel. As the heroes breached Lauhai's domain, she summoned a monstrous fog to blind them, then raised the very sea itself into a maelstrom to swallow their vessel. But Väinämöinen, the master of song, countered her magic with his own, calming the waves with ancient verses and carving a path through the mist with the power of his voice. The heroes fought their way to the Sampo, secured it, and fled back to their ship, setting a course for home with their priceless prize. Their victory, however, was desperately short-lived. The enraged Lauhai transformed herself into a terrifying form, taking to the skies as a colossal griffin or a great eagle with wings of iron. She gave chase, her shadow darkening the water as she descended upon their ship. A second, even more frantic battle erupted on the open sea. Lauhai clawed at the Sampo where it was lashed to the mast, while the heroes fought desperately to defend it. Lemminkainen swung his sword, and Väinämöinen raised his oar to fend off the monstrous creature. In the violent struggle, the Sampo was torn from its moorings. It tumbled from the ship, shattering into countless pieces against the rocky waves. The great mill, the source of infinite prosperity, was lost forever to the depths. Lauhai, defeated and empty-handed, managed to salvage only a few small, broken fragments of the lid before retreating to her gloomy homeland. Yet this catastrophic loss was not a complete tragedy. The fragments of the Sampo that sank into the sea did not vanish without a trace. Väinämöinen and his companions gathered what pieces they could find, and these shards, scattered by the currents, became the source of what little scattered good fortune exists in the world. The pieces that washed ashore brought fertility to the land of Finland, explaining its natural bounty. Other fragments lost to the deep became the wealth of the sea, the abundance of fish that sustained the people. The broken lid that Lauhai carried back to Pohjola was said to bring only meager and unreliable luck, a pale shadow of the Sampo's true power. So the epic ends not with a triumphant victory but with a poignant acceptance. The world was not granted endless, easy wealth, but was instead seeded with fragments of potential, with prosperity that must be earned through hardship and toil. This myth makes you wonder if it is a profound metaphor for the human condition itself, where perfect fortune is always just out of reach. Broken into pieces, we spend our lives trying to gather from an unforgiving world. Before creation, there was only a swirling, formless abyss of salt water, a primordial goddess named Tiamat. She was the ocean of chaos, the mother of all things, and she was enraged. Her husband, the freshwater god Apsu, had been slain by their own grandchildren, the younger gods, whose noise and ambition disturbed the ancient quiet. Tiamat, in her bottomless grief and fury, decided to avenge him. She birthed an army of monstrous deities, creatures of venom and scale, with fangs and irresistible venom. To lead this terrifying horde, she appointed her new consort, the god Kingu, and placed the very tablets of destiny upon his chest, granting him authority over the cosmos itself. The younger gods trembled before this rising tide of vengeance. They had no champion who could stand against the mother of all. In their desperation, they turned to the youngest among them, a god of storms and magic named Marduk. He saw their fear and made a fateful bargain. He would face Tiamat, but only if they granted him absolute, undisputed kingship over the entire pantheon. With no other choice, the gods assembled in a grand council, feasted in his honor, and proclaimed him their supreme leader. Now armed with divine authority, Marduk prepared for a war of cosmic proportions. He fashioned a colossal bow and lightning arrows, and he created the four winds to be his invisible allies. But his most cunning weapon was a great net, woven to entangle the Chaos Dragon and her monstrous children. He mounted his terrifying storm chariot, drawn by four ferocious steeds, and rode out to confront the embodiment of primal disorder. The battlefield was the edge of existence itself. Tiamat let out a mighty roar, a sound that could shatter worlds, and charged. She opened her massive jaws, wide enough to swallow the universe, but Marduk was ready. He commanded the winds to rush into her gaping mouth, inflating her body and holding her jaws agape. As she struggled, helpless, he cast his net, ensnaring her completely. Then, with a single, definitive act, he ended the war and began the world. He drove an evil wind deep into her belly and fired a single arrow that tore through her inflated body, splitting her heart and silencing her roar forever. With her army scattering in terror, Marduk then turned to the colossal corpse of the Chaos Goddess. He stood upon her lifeless form, and with a power granted by the united gods, he cleaved her in two. He lifted one half of her body high into the air to arch the heavens, and he anchored the other half below to form the foundation of the earth. From her eyes, he caused the Tigris and Euphrates rivers to flow. He organized the stars, the moon, and the sun, establishing the rhythms of day and night, of months and years. This was not mere victory, it was creation itself, a universe forged from the body of a defeated monster. The world we know was born from a battle, a structured order carved out of violent, primeval chaos. It makes you wonder if this ancient story, so fundamental to a civilization, is a mythic explanation for the very act of creation, or a deeper memory of humanity's own struggle to impose order on a wild and untamed natural world. Far beneath the frozen Arctic ice, in a world of crushing pressure and perpetual dark, resides a goddess whose sorrow dictates the fate of all who live above. This is Sedna, the mistress of the sea, a being of profound and terrible power. Her story begins not with a battle cry, but with a brutal betrayal, cast into the ocean by her own terrified father, who severed her fingers as she clung to the boat. Sedna sank to the abyss. Her fingers, transformed into the seals, walruses, and whales, became the marine life the Inuit people depend upon, and Sedna herself became their vengeful ruler. Her tangled, matted hair, never combed, is home to the very souls of these animals. When she is content, she releases them, and the hunters find bounty. But when she is angered, she hides the creatures away, and famine grips the land. The source of her fury is written in the sky above. The moon god, known as Aningan or Takyap Inua, is locked in his own eternal, desperate chase across the heavens, forever pursuing his sister, the sun goddess. This celestial dance defines the passage of time, the cycle of day and night. But there are moments when the chase concludes, when Aningan finally catches his brilliant sister. This convergence is a solar eclipse, a terrifying event where the sky grows dark at midday. For the people below, this is more than a celestial oddity, it is a direct trigger for chaos in their world. The eclipse is seen as a moment of violation and imbalance, an act that enraged the sea goddess Sedna. Her fury manifests in the physical world as violent storms and dangerously churning seas, making the ocean impassable and the hunt impossible. Her agitation is so great that it disturbs the marine animals, causing them to retreat into the deepest shadows of her domain. To restore balance, a delicate and crucial ritual must be performed. The Angakok, a spiritual shaman, must undertake a perilous journey of the soul. Descending into a trance, the shaman's spirit travels to the ocean floor, to the very home of the enraged goddess. There, the shaman must approach the terrifying Sedna and with immense care and respect begin to gently comb the terrible tangles from her long, snarled hair. This act of ritual grooming is not one of vanity but one of profound appeasement. As the shaman patiently combs, they are soothing Sedna's anger, calming her turbulent spirit. With each tangle released, her rage subsides, the churning seas grow calm, the storms abate, and most importantly, the souls of the sea animals are freed from her hair, returning to the waters so the people may live. This is a battle fought not with weapons but with ritual and understanding. It is a cyclical conflict between the celestial and the marine, a perfect, poetic explanation for the very tides and the precariousness of survival in an unforgiving world. It makes you wonder if this entire myth, from the eclipse to the combing of hair, is a beautiful, intricate model of the natural world, personifying the complex relationships between the moon, the ocean, and the life within it. From the frozen Arctic, we journey to the sun-scorched savanna, where another empire was born from a clash of destiny and dark magic. The epic of Sundiata Keita is the foundational story of the Mali Empire, a legend so powerful it blurs the line between history and myth. On one side stood Salmayoro Kante, the sorcerer king of the Soso Empire. He was a figure of terror, a ruler whose magical powers made him seemingly invincible. His palace was adorned with the skins of 99 kings he had defeated, and he could vanish into thin air or become immune to any weapon. His tyranny cast a long shadow over the Mandinka people. Opposing him was Sundiata, a prince born in exile. According to the oral traditions preserved by griots for centuries, Sundiata was crippled as a child, unable to walk until the age of 7. But when he finally rose, he stood with a strength that foretold his glorious future. Forced to flee from Salmayoro's plots, he wandered from kingdom to kingdom, gathering allies and a reputation for wisdom and courage. The stage was set for a final confrontation that would decide the fate of West Africa. The two armies met at the Battle of Karina. The air crackled not just with the tension of war, but with supernatural energy. As the forces clashed, the two leaders sought each other out. Sundiata, a skilled hunter and warrior, fired arrow after arrow at the sorcerer king, but each one glanced harmlessly off his enchanted body. Salmayoro, confident in his invulnerability, mocked the prince's efforts, but Sundiata had not gathered allies in vain. Through wisdom and counsel, he had learned the one singular secret to Salmayoro's power. The sorcerer's magic had a single, bizarre weakness, a vulnerability to the spur of a white rooster. On the tip of his final arrow, Sundiata fastened this humble, organic tip. He drew his bow and let the fated arrow fly. It struck Salmayoro in the shoulder, and in that instant the king's immense power shattered. His invincibility broken, Salmayoro turned and fled from the battlefield, vanishing from history. His defeat was so total that his army collapsed, and Sundiata was proclaimed the Mansa, or emperor, of a new united realm. From this legendary victory, Sundiata established the Mali Empire, a civilization that would grow into one of the wealthiest and most powerful the world has ever known, famed for its centers of learning and the legendary city of Timbuktu. This story makes you wonder if the magical rooster's spur was a symbolic key, representing some vital, real-world tactical or political insight that allowed a great leader to topple an seemingly unstoppable foe. His triumph so complete it could only be explained in the language of epic destiny. Water itself can be a sacred actor in a cosmic drama. In the Aboriginal Dreamtime, a foundational narrative unfolds not as a clash of armies, but as a profound story of creation, taboo, and the very source of life. This is the journey of the Wawalag sisters, two ancestral beings who traveled across the raw, unformed land. As they walked, they named the animals and the plants, singing the world into existence with their powerful ritual songs. Their journey was one of creation and law-giving until they came to a sacred waterhole, a place of deep spiritual significance. Unknowingly, they had camped on the home of Yulunga, the great rainbow serpent, a colossal being of immense power and a guardian of sacred law. The sisters, in their cyclical rhythm of life, soon gave birth. The blood from this childbirth, a powerful substance connected to fertility and womanhood, trickled into the waters of the serpent's home. This act violated a fundamental Dreamtime taboo, polluting the serpent's sacred space and disturbing his slumber. Enraged, Yulunga emerged from the depths. His massive, coiled body began to rise, and as he did, he brought the water with him. This was not a simple attack, it was a cosmic reaction. The serpent's rising caused a great flood to engulf the land, a deluge that threatened to swallow everything the sisters had created. The sisters, terrified, sang their powerful songs in a desperate attempt to calm the rising waters and appease the great serpent's anger. Their voices were a force of creation trying to hold back a force of divine retribution. In the climax of the story, Yulunga does not merely destroy the sisters. He swallows them whole, consuming them and their creative power into his own being. But this act is not an end. The serpent, having enacted justice for the broken law, later regurgitates the sisters alive and unharmed. This act of consumption and release is the pivotal moment. It establishes a new, permanent order. The event creates the landscape itself, with the waterholes and rivers shaped by the serpent's movement. More importantly, it forges an unbreakable connection between the people, the land, and the sacred law. The rituals, the songs, and the taboos observed from that day forward are a direct result of this encounter, a way for the people to maintain balance and honor the agreement between humanity and the powerful ancestral beings. This story makes you wonder if this Dreamtime narrative is a living map of the land itself, encoding ecological knowledge and social law within a timeless drama that explains why the world is the way it is. Even the most harmonious societies understand the necessity of struggle. For the ancient Hawaiians, this truth was woven into the very fabric of the cosmos through the eternal dance of two powerful gods. Ku, the fierce deity of war, governance, and human labor, stood in perpetual tension with Lono, the benevolent god of peace, agriculture, rainfall, and fertility. Their relationship was not a war of annihilation, but a carefully balanced cyclical battle that dictated the rhythm of life across the islands. This divine struggle manifested in the changing seasons, creating a sacred calendar that everyone, from the alii chiefs to the common farmers, lived by. For 8 months of the year, Ku held sway. This was the time of work, of political expansion, and of war. It was when the great temples or heiau dedicated to Ku were active, when warriors trained, and when the hard labor of building and farming was undertaken. Can you feel the intensity of that prolonged effort, the societal focus on strength and structure? Then, as the stars shifted and the rainy season approached, a profound transformation began. The season of Lono, known as Makahiki, commenced. This was a time of radical peace. For 4 months, the god of war was symbolically set aside. The idols of Ku were ritually covered with white copper cloth, and all warfare was strictly forbidden. In a stunning act of societal coordination, the entire archipelago entered a state of sacred truce. The symbol of Lono, a tall pole with a crossbar from which hung white sheets of copper and feathers, was carried in procession around each island. As this emblem traveled the coastline, it collected tributes from every community. These were not merely taxes, but offerings of gratitude for the land's bounty, a recognition that the fruits of the earth came from Lono's gentle hand. During Makahiki, the business of life shifted entirely. The focus moved from conquest to celebration, from work to games. Communities came together for massive sporting competitions that tested strength, agility, and skill. There were foot races, boxing matches, and sliding contests on the grassy hillsides. These were not just for entertainment, they were religious observances, a way to honor Lono through joyful physical expression. It was a time for feasting, for music, and for repairing social bonds that might have frayed during Ku's strenuous season. But this idyllic peace was always temporary. As the Makahiki period drew to a close, the symbolic battle reached its climax. In a powerful ceremony, the paramount chief would ritually overturn the stack of stones that represented Lono's dominion. This act signaled the return of Ku, the uncovering of the war god's idols, and the resumption of political work and the potential for conflict. The season of war and governance had returned, and the cycle began anew. This eternal, rhythmic battle between Ku and Lono provided the ultimate stability. It was a system that acknowledged both the need for peaceful growth and the unavoidable reality of conflict, giving each its proper time and sacred purpose. This cosmic balance makes you wonder if this beautiful, structured duality was the key to the society's resilience. A way of living that accepted the opposing forces within nature and human society, not as a problem to be solved, but as a dance to be honored. A hero's true power often sleeps until his people face extinction. In the rugged mountains of Armenia, the national epic known as the Daredevils of Sasun tells of one such champion, a man named David. From the moment of his birth, he was marked by a supernatural strength. A child who could crush stones in his tiny hands and whose cries shook the very foundations of the land. This was not a strength for boasting, but a dormant force waiting for the hour of greatest need. That hour arrived with the tax collectors of the Arab invader, Mesra Melik, a tyrant whose demands for tribute and brides had bled the people of Sasun dry for 40 years. When the emperor's envoy arrived to claim his due, the young David could no longer contain the fury of his oppressed homeland. In a single, defiant act, he slew the tax collectors, tearing their caravan apart and hurling their treasure into the lake. This was not just rebellion, it was a declaration of war, one that would culminate in a duel for the soul of a nation. Mesra Melik, enraged by this insult, summoned the young hero to his opulent court for a contest of strength, a trap designed to humiliate and destroy him. David, armed with little more than the iron will of his people, journeyed to the heart of the enemy's domain. The tyrant first challenged him to a test of stone throwing, but David's cast was so mighty it shattered the palace walls. Then came the single combat, a fight that began with David at a terrifying disadvantage. Mesra Melik, a seasoned warrior king, used his experience and brute force to overpower the younger hero. He threw David to the ground and pressed his knee into his chest, slowly crushing the life from him. In that moment of ultimate despair, as the darkness closed in, David felt a surge of energy flow from the distant, sacred soil of his homeland. It was the collective spirit of Sasun, the prayers of his family, the very breath of the mountains rushing into his lungs. With a roar that echoed his ancestors, he threw off the tyrant and rose reborn. His magical sword, a legacy from his father, seemed to leap into his hand, its blade humming with a newfound light. The final exchange was swift and decisive. David's empowered strike cleaved through Mesra Melik's armor, felling the oppressor and shattering the chains of his people. This was more than a personal victory. It was the moment a land rediscovered its own voice through the strength of its champion. Could such a legend of a hero revitalized by his native soil be the enduring memory of a real historical war of liberation, where the identity of a people refused to be extinguished? Our final legend emerges not from misty hills or frozen seas, but from the writings of a single philosopher, a story so potent it has haunted humanity for millennia. Plato, in his dialogues Timaeus and Critias, described a formidable island empire existing 9,000 years before his own time, a civilization of staggering advancement and beauty. Atlantis was a marvel of concentric rings of land and water, with a capital city boasting hot and cold springs, grand temples sheathed in precious metals, and a society that lived in harmony under the laws of Poseidon. This was a utopia, a golden age made real, but power, as it so often does, corrupted its perfect balance. The divine portion within the Atlanteans faded, replaced by a base human hubris. They ceased to be content with their blessed isle and turned their ambitions outward, building a vast naval armada with the goal of enslaving the entire Mediterranean world. Their armies marched and their ships darkened the sea, an unstoppable force of technological might and imperial hunger. They met their match, however, in a place that would have seemed utterly improbable to Plato's original audience. The ones who stood against the Atlantean tide were the ancient Athenians. This was not the Athens of Plato's day, but a primordial, virtuous version of the city-state. These Athenians were a people of simple, noble character, living under a constitution that prioritized courage and community over wealth and conquest. When the Atlantean invasion came, this early Athens alone rallied its allies and faced the colossal enemy. In a war that pitted utopian technology against primal virtue, the Athenians triumphed. They defeated the Atlantean forces on their very doorstep, liberating the occupied lands and single-handedly stemming the tide of tyranny. Yet their victory was not the end of the story. It was merely the prelude to a far greater cataclysm. Soon after the war, in a single day and night of unnatural fury, the entire island of Atlantis was consumed. Violent earthquakes and a monumental flood sank the legendary continent beneath the waves, vanishing its cities, its people, and its advanced knowledge into the deep abyss. The ancient Athenian army, returning home in triumph, was also swallowed by the earth, their heroic sacrifice lost to time. So, what are we to make of this epic tale? Was it a pure moral fable crafted by Plato to warn his fellow Athenians about the dangers of imperial ambition and spiritual decay, a caution that they themselves would fail to heed? Or could it be a deeply distorted memory of a real historical catastrophe, a cultural echo of the late Bronze Age collapse that saw mighty seafaring empires like the Minoans on Thera vanish almost overnight after a volcanic eruption? Perhaps it is something else entirely, a prophetic vision of every advanced society that overreaches, that believes its own power makes it invincible, only to be humbled by the raw, untamable forces of nature. The lost battle of Atlantis endures not because we have found its sunken spires, but because its mystery holds up a mirror to our own world, asking us what we are building and what price we might one day pay for our own pride. These timeless stories of divine war and heroic struggle share a deep psychological blueprint. They are not random fantasies, but rather profound reflections of our own inner world projected onto a cosmic scale. Consider the terrifying power of a hurricane or the sudden violence of an earthquake. For ancient cultures without modern science, such events were incomprehensible, their scale and fury demanding an explanation equal to their impact. A cataclysm that sank an island or buried a city in ash was too immense to be a simple accident of nature. It had to be the outcome of a battle, the collateral damage from a spear thrown by a god or the death throes of a vanquished primordial beast. The Titanomachy, with its mountains hurled like pebbles, gives a face and a reason to the geologic upheavals that shaped the ancient world. Ragnarok's Fimbulwinter personifies the existential dread of a climate shift so severe it threatens all life. These myths transform anonymous natural disasters into narratives with cause and effect, making a chaotic and frightening universe feel, in a strange way, intelligible. At the core of nearly every one of these chronicles lies the fundamental tension between order and chaos. We see this duality in the Slavic myth of Perun and Veles, a perpetual cycle where the structured sky god must constantly battle the chaotic earth deity to bring life-giving rain. This is not just a weather pattern, it is a psychological drama about our own need for stability amidst the unpredictable currents of existence. We build societies, laws, and families islands of order, while knowing they are perpetually vulnerable to the chaotic storms of conflict, disease, and chance. The Gigantomachy, where the civilized Olympians defend their home against the raw, monstrous forces of the earth, is a powerful metaphor for this very human struggle. Our heroes are the ones who stand at the gate, holding back the darkness that threatens to overwhelm the fragile light of our communities. And what of the heroes themselves? They are walking, talking embodiments of our ideals and our anxieties. Rostam represents the unbearable weight of duty and honor, forced into a tragic duel that stains his virtue. Sundiata embodies the hope that even the most profound weakness can be overcome to achieve a glorious destiny. Hanuman is the perfect picture of selfless devotion, while Arjuna personifies the agonizing moral conflict between personal bonds and righteous action. We create these figures to give shape to the qualities we admire and to explore the difficult choices we fear we might one day have to make. They are larger-than-life mirrors showing us the best and worst of ourselves. Finally, these epic battles often serve as a way to process the collective trauma of real, historical warfare. The sheer, annihilating scale of the Kurukshetra war, where entire bloodlines are wiped out and victory feels like defeat, reads like a nation's psyche grappling with the memory of a devastating civil war. The Arthurian dream shattering at Camlan, where brother kills brother and the Golden Age ends, could be a poetic echo of the brutal internecine strife that followed the Roman withdrawal from Britain. When the reality of history is too painful to recount directly, it finds a safer outlet in the realm of myth, where the pain can be examined, the lessons learned, and the fallen honored through the veil of allegory. So the next time you hear a story about gods clashing in the heavens or a hero facing a monster, listen closely. You are not just hearing a tale, you are listening to the ancient, enduring voice of humanity trying to make sense of its world, its fears, and its own extraordinary spirit. We have traveled from the cosmic birth pangs of the gods to the twilight of kingdoms, witnessing 25 battles that forged the very bedrock of human imagination. These are not mere campfire tales, they are the deep, psychological archetypes that gave meaning to a chaotic world. They explain the terrifying power of nature in the clash of titans, gave voice to our moral dilemmas on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, and embodied our hope for order in the triumph of heroes like Sundiata and David. These stories were the original textbooks teaching entire civilizations about honor, duty, the dangers of hubris, and the fragile balance between creation and destruction. They are the echoes of real fears, real wars, and real triumphs, polished by countless retellings into the timeless legends we know today. So as we leave this tapestry of myth and memory, we are left with one final question. Which of these legendary conflicts resonates most with you, and what modern struggles do you see reflected in these ancient echoes? Let us know your own favorite myths in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this journey through the chronicles of legendary battles, please like, subscribe, and join us for the next exploration into history's greatest mysteries.